Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Tori, and this evening I'm very excited to sit down with a prolific science fiction and fantasy author who, among many other things, is the author of the Coldfire Trilogy, which I read this year and absolutely fell in love with. I'm already excited to go back and reread it again. I can't wait, and I'm very excited to get to Nightborn, the prequel, very soon. But Celia, thank you so much for spending some time with me this evening. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I always like hearing about the kind of early stages of how you became a writer and what drew you to the medium of writing specifically. And I know you have a theater background as well, which I also do. So that was very exciting when I found that out. But one of the things that I loved about when I was doing some research on your early writing career and when you were first learning storytelling was that your dad had a really big influence in how you approach the love of words and how they work on a page and how sentences are formed. And I was wondering, because I know you've talked a little bit about that in interviews before, but I was wondering if there are any characters in any of your works that carry aspects of him in them.
Nope.
They're all completely their own.
I've only in my entire career ever had two characters that were inspired by real people.
Okay.
One of which was the Mara in Madness Season, which is a kind of silly, flighty alien, and the personality is actually a girl I used to play D&D with.
Oh, fun.
And the other, it was a kind of brash guy that Damien was kind of based on personality-wise.
Okay.
Not in their traits in particular, but just in general means of interaction and everything. So that was inspired by him. Both of them I gamed with. So both of them I saw in a variety of characters. And these are the traits that carried through, you know.
Yeah. So I suppose that's probably a little bit easier to kind of disseminate them into a character as opposed to it being a very like direct insert.
Well, it definitely helped in the early days when I was running a weekly D&D game. And almost every major character in my early books at one point showed up in the game in some form. Now, often they were in a rudimentary form, and they don't look like that anymore. Gerald Tarrant was in my game. I mean, I have friends who role played with Gerald Tarrant in his very early years. The Madness Season had a hive mind, and it was through role playing the hive mind that I realized what could not be done to a hive mind because the hive mind was protected and it would catch on to things faster. I got more of a sense of the timing of all that. So it was kind of an experimental laboratory, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, and I had some very creative friends. And
that always helps. That's awesome. Yeah, I think I've just started doing a little bit of DMing, and it is such a, I think, good way for writers to practice in a different format. And I think it's teaching me a lot already, and I'm very excited to see how that helps elevate the way I approach the craft of writing, just telling story in a completely different medium, because it's different than theater and it's different than writing on a page. There are some definite similarities though.
It also depends on what game you're playing, because if you're dealing with like the World of Darkness vampire, the tremendous exploration of what immortality would do to someone who has to do monstrous things to survive. So, you know, I was pretty familiar with that because I was dealing with Tarrant and with, you know, longer lived characters and a vampire character. But I imagine if you haven't gone through all that, that dealing with that game gave an interesting way to explore that. Honestly, the biggest problem was boredom, you know, and to sense what the boredom is. And the whole White Wolf game is based on the concept that vampires get so bored, they'll even screw each other. They'll do anything at all just to not be bored. And I kind of knew that in words, but watching how 24 different people found different ways to express that was kind of eye-opening for me. You know, it got me able to look outside my own head at solutions that other people were finding.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I want to jump forward a little bit since we're touching on the immortality a little bit, because I feel like writing immortality in characters seems like it would be so much more difficult more difficult to make it feel organic than it would just writing a normal lifetime human character. So do you find that to be the case, or do you find writing immortal characters easy?
I didn't find it hard, but the few times I have written a very long-lived, potentially immortal character, well, there are three. The Yezu really are, but they haven't been around more than a few centuries. So they're technically immortal. They're probably not going to die unless something kills them, but they don't have that incredible backlog of history. In the Madness season, we know the main character has been around for at least 2,000 years, but his memory gets rid of stuff. It clears it out. And that was the whole concept of the time fugue, where something would trigger a memory. He'd get an episodic memory back. He'd relive it. He'd get to learn from it. It was connected to what he was doing. An idea later stolen for the show Forever Night, but it was my creation. Ooh. Yep. And that enabled him to let the rest of it go. So he had no memory of everybody he'd met 300 years ago and everything he'd been through mentally. He was really evolving era by era by era. And if there was something he needed from far in his past, it was still in storage. And that was how his brain would call it up for him.
Sure.
Then you have Tarrant, where, of course, his backstory for 1,000 years is the character, and for him, it's there every moment on one hand. And on the other hand, he has completely disowned the first half of his life. So it is the same person. I'm doing a story right now. Back up a little bit. I'm doing a series of short stories right now that I'm going to be putting online with Kindle, ebook, very short stories, vignettes really, from various times in history. Because there are a lot of events that are hinted at in the trilogy, never really expanded. Not necessarily worth a whole book in their own right, but they're the Rock genocide wars, the end of the age of false messiahs. I mean, there are all sorts of periods going through this history when mankind and womankind reacted to the planet, learned how to control the planet, had some false starts along the way. You have the whole Neo-Gothic revival when, for a variety of reasons we may talk about later, they were reviving the whole Gothic style, and that kind of worked, but obviously it wasn't the answer because it didn't keep going. So they had many, many things they tried. Of course, it culminates about 500 years before the book takes place in the great war between good and evil, at which point Tarrant is ensconced in the forest. This has become a whirlpool of negative and malevolent fae, so everything that's evil in the world is manifesting there. And the Church of the One God decides they've got to root it out. It's just too dangerous. They have to get rid of it. And of course, ultimately, they lose that battle. And that is the setting that we're in, that in the war of good versus evil, good didn't achieve its goals. And now they're picking up the pieces and trying to put stuff back together, and put up as much of a fight as they can. But it can't be a bigger battle than that. I mean, that was the big one.
Right.
You cannot do it. You can try to repeat it, but there's nothing to go beyond that.
Right.
So the history's all in the characters, and I'm going to be doing little stories, short stories. And the one I'm working on now is Tarrant when he was a kid, very young kid.
Oh, I love that.
And we get to see, it'll probably be called Feyrise. You can watch for it on Amazon. Hopefully I'll finish it someday.
I'm so excited.
The adepts are new. They are an evolutionary adaptation to the planet. So you start seeing them pop up. There aren't a lot of them. People don't know about a lot of them. You have some sorcerers who are the ones that can kind of work the Fae. But the ones that are born with the ability to see it, that is a new adaptation because he was from the 3rd century. So they haven't been there that long, like 12 generations, 10 or 12 generations. Yeah. So evolution is fast on Erna, but still it's new. And you have this kid. And we know his history. We know he had a really bad history, an extremely large family, very hostile to him. We know he kind of came off as effeminate to them, given the setting he was in, that they were kind of all burly, kind of combat-oriented characters, and that played into his mindset. One of my favorite lines that just hints at that is when he said that one of the first things he did after he became undead and got his power up, was to kill all his brothers, except for one. No, that's right. He spared his kid. He killed all his brothers. And he said that was the most pleasurable killing I ever did. So the vengeance of that entire childhood. So get a glimpse into that, get a glimpse into what it's like to try to grow up with this power when there is no one to explain it. You know, it's not like there are books on being an adept. It's not like you can go into town, find the local adept and talk to them, which they do in Black Sun Rising, because there are now enough of them that people know where they are and know they can talk to them and know they can hire them out for things. You know, you could say, hey, tutor me, I got the power.
Yeah.
But in his day, there wasn't anything. So he's kind of floundering into the unknown, trying to work it out. As with most magical and telepathic powers in stories I write, it kicks in about puberty because it's not manageable below that. You can't have a 2-year-old with this power. You just can't. You can go sane. So in this case, I think there's a little harbinger of the power. There may be episodes of the power. It's not necessarily completely gone until puberty, but it doesn't really kick in full time and full power until puberty, which is about the age he's at when this story takes place. So it's a vignette. It'll have a kind of beginning, middle, end, but it's not primarily written as an adventure. It's written for readers of the trilogy to get more into it and to see more of what's going on. So I'm very excited about that one. Watch for it. And my hope is to do a lot of little vignettes from different periods. And on Patreon, I have been taking requests so that who are on Patreon and support me there, I've asked them, what would you like to see? So I have a list of what they would like most to see little stories of. And there's so many things in history to explore. And partly it's because I have so many fans who want sequels because they want more of it. But as you read the book, the things that make the book, they end. The character everybody wants to see more of is not the same character. The world is not the same world. The magic system is not the same magic system. Usually when people ask for a sequel, they're asking for more adventures of whatever character they like. You want to see more. And that doesn't exist anymore. So I've always felt since day one, there can't be a sequel after that. It can't possibly be well, I thought there couldn't be a sequel. And the whole magic system changes, so it's not very accessible anymore. And so I felt that there was no way to do a sequel. That's why I did a prequel to explore more, and that's why I'm doing these little stories. And I now have a concept for a sequel, but it's not those characters and that situation. It's like, here's the world, here's what these characters left behind. I have come up with an interesting story to tell, which is in the age when humankind is reacting to what happened. I mean, if you have a whole world full of sorcerers that can't source.
Right.
The adepts can see the stuff, but the sorcerers can't anymore because they can't work their vision. So they've become a smaller minority of power. So there are a lot of ramifications of it that are very interesting. The Faeborn are still around, but there aren't going to be any more created in theory. So it's a finite number because that's what they did it for. That was the whole point. They don't know that that's completely severed. They don't know that there will not be any in the future, but certainly the fact that you would spin off one if you even had a bad day, that's gone. So, and I did come up with a story to tell, so there will be a sequel, but it's not the further adventures of almost anyone. The main character does make a very brief appearance in the book at the very end, kind of just as an introduction. He's here.
Kind of passing the torch.
Sort of, I looked at him and I went, well, that is kind of interesting. I did kind of seed something here that could be worth exploring. And of course, with that whole world, it's all rooted in history. You can't understand the present day without understanding where they came from and what they've been through. In the same way that when the world shifts and human culture shifts, the fact that for 1,200 years they had this highly volatile magical force active, that's always going to shape who they were.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm very excited to hear that there's, I don't know, I'm excited for the sequel. I'm really excited to see what you do with it. And I also think as an author, it's kind of, I would imagine, a kind of double-edged sword, because it's a huge compliment that everybody loves it so much that they want the further adventures of.
It is.
And also, because when the story is finite, there's something really beautiful about that is the story, and that letting it go and letting that be the end is also something that's really important. So I can imagine that balance is really hard to work with.
I believe in that a lot, and a number of my books, if not all of them, most of them have endings that are complete endings where that story is over. And the ending is part of the story. If I've given you a really good resolution, it wraps up all the big things, the big mysteries. You have, I talk about the one of the plots of the book being the journey of discovery of the reader, that you are discovering the world, you're discovering the story, you're going with the characters to figure out what the end is going to be. You know, this alien shore towards the end, when they figure out what is going on, the reader figures out what is going on, but then there can't be another book where they're discovering it because they already know it. If you've I used to joke that I'm rambling a bit. I'm sorry. I hope you like it.
No. Please ramble. Please ramble.
I used to joke in the 80s that the sequel to every fantasy movie involved gods. And at that point, Conan the Barbarian, everything, you name it, there's a god in movie 2. And the bad guy's castle always collapses at the end, which I did too. And the reason is, you know, when they wrote these books, they were trying to write the best story they could possibly write with the most impactful ending they could possibly do. And if they held back something for the next book, that part is an ending.
Right.
You know, you lose an impact. So these authors, kind of not true. I mean, Howard was writing a series, but when you do the first book, that's the intro. You've got all the intro material. You've got the discovery of the character and the discovery of the world, and you're never going to have that again. So what I observed was that in all these second fantasy movies, since they had to top the first one, and the original subject matter wasn't going to do that, they would throw in a god. Or some cult of gods or something, because that was the only thing that topped, you know, we destroyed the king who was going to take over the whole world. Can't think of anything that goes beyond that other than his god. You know, that's bigger. Otherwise, if it's just another king that wants to take over the world, yawn.
Right.
So, and I hope you don't mind my cat joining into the conversation.
Not at all. This is a very cat-friendly channel.
This is Vesta.
Oh.
Relatively new.
Beautiful cat.
Yeah, she's gorgeous. I'm such a sucker for the Maine Coon type, you know, big, fluffy, fuzzy. Cat's small, but the coat is really big and fluffy. Yep. And she's
my older cat is that way too. She's not quite a long hair, but she's just very big and fluffy, and she's great.
She's really a medium. And I love the shagginess as opposed to the Persian. You know, the Maine Coon always look a little bit like they needed to be brushed.
Yeah, they look a little bit more like a fantasy creature. Yeah. Well, oh my goodness. I feel like I could ask you 5 hours of questions about the Coldfire Trilogy, honestly.
Well, you said you're going to edit, so ask away and just take what you want.
Yeah, exactly. I got distracted by the cat. I got to get back on my train of thought.
Sorry. Train of thought was sequels with fantasy. And sequels.
I know what it was.
Top the original.
It was the building of the because you were talking about other series and how the second book kind of has nowhere to go, but okay, well, we have to throw a god in, or we have to, you know, to just ramp up the tension in second films when they're based off of these fantasy stories. So when you're writing something like the Coldfire Trilogy, where you have multiple novel installments, how do you balance giving enough to each book, but also ramping it up each time to reach that ultimate finale?
Well, Coldfire Trilogy has a separate adventure in book 2. They go to the pattern of Coldfire, baby spoilers. The overall pattern of Coldfire is that in the first book, you have a group of adventurers. They're stuck together. You have two characters that really not only don't want to work together, but want to kill each other. Forced to work together, and at the end of the book they split up. Yeah. Book 2 is the point at which you will become aware that is the pair going through the whole series, and that I can and do kill off main characters, but nonetheless, there is a sense of plot armor that once you've got that pair and that pair matters, we're watching a story that's probably going to develop through 3 books. So the main suspense in book 1 that you really don't know who's going to die. A couple of people drop out of the running on that. So that's the first thing you have to deal with. So they go to a distant land. They take Heseth with them, who was a minor character in book 1. And
I love her.
Yeah. Well, dealing with the rock history is one of the plans for the stories. I love that one. I'll talk about it briefly after this. Remind me. Say rock to me later, and I'll remember.
Okay.
But they go to another land, and they're dealing with another threat. New characters, except for those 3. Whole new situation. New Fae, because they're dealing with characters that can use the title Fae. So a lot of it is a new discovery. But also, as I said, for me, especially in a fantasy novel, but I think in any novel, like speculative, science fiction, fantasy, horror, that whole thing, that the reader's voyage of discovery is one of your plot arcs.
Sure.
That your reader is going to be led through slow but sure discovery of what is going on, what is behind it, how deadly it is, what has to be done, and then they experience the ending. But that discovery where they're figuring things out, that's part of the story. That's a major story arc in of itself. And of course, in Coldfire, that continues in book 2, because in book 1, they've run into what I'm going to call a demon. And everybody who's read the books know it isn't actually, but we'll use the word, the Yezu, and which are sort of thematic demons. They're spirits that express one very intense emotional state of humans. And there is one they know is connected to sadism in some form, shape, or manner. And they are picking up that he's done some really shitty things and may have skewed the entire balance of the planet, and that much of what they went through in book 1 was because of him. And they come to believe that information on that will be to the east. His origins lie to the east. They have to go there. And for various reasons having to do with geography, nobody goes back and forth. So there's been no news from the east. There may be people there, but they don't have a connection to them. So the voyage of discovery continues into that book. So that keeps going. I have been complimented by a number of readers that book 2 was interesting, because that is usually the part of a trilogy that really flags. Because book 1, you have introduction. Book 3, you have resolution. What do you do in the middle?
Right.
And you need enough independent story arcs that resolve in that book, but you also need enough of an investment in the entire series. So that's how it worked. This is like, what is Callista? What's he's doing? You're discovering how the world works for the first time. So that's with that. Oh, my favorite part of the rock. One of my favorite concepts in the whole book. For those listening to this who have not read the book, the theme is that there is a force on this planet that essentially looks like magic, and looks like they're casting spells and everything, and all our usual. And they even like reverted to the language of medieval sorcery, because they gave them words, but it's not. It's a natural force. It's natural to the planet. It follows natural laws. They don't always understand it. They can't always control it, but they know deep inside that the planet is creating this, and it's doing what it's doing for reasons. And if they can understand the reasons, they can maybe control it a little more, which is really the basic underlying science fiction theme, right? If we can understand this, we can control it.
Right.
And it responds to human thoughts and emotions, so that anything that people feel very, very strongly might imprint itself on this force, which is the Fae, and then that might manifest something somehow. Might affect nature, might affect other people, might even create an illusion of some creature, might twist some existing creature into something else. And what happened with the rock was they're kind of cat-like. You kind of pick that up, kind of lion-like structurally. And they were the closest thing to a human intelligence on that planet. The humans weren't seeing a lot of them. They knew they were being watched at one point, but they became aware that they had a society, that they had intelligence that might be as much as humans did. I mean, originally they thought there was not another species that could rival humanity. And it's kind of implied that the ship that brought them there also decided there wasn't a rival species. But now they look at the rock, and what little they know of them, they're saying, this would be us. I mean, this planet's version of us. So now you have the entire colony perceiving the rock in terms of them being human. Species, this is us. They think like us. They act like us. And in this planet, that affects evolution. So over the course of centuries, the rock actually become more and more human in shape, in communication. They never lose their original nature. But the reason they look more like human beings is because humans kept saying they're the closest thing to human on this planet. And then Faye turned them into the closest things to human on the planet. So cool. So that's an interesting story in which every single stage of that evolution has its own stories, including the big one, the point at which the colonists and their descendants recognized what was happening and realized that they could be really screwed. And they basically decided to wipe them out. And you had a genocidal war, very, very deliberate. They said this species has the potential to become as intelligent as we are and not like us. And it is tuned into the planet, and we're not. And they're afraid. And the whole thing of the accelerated evolution because of the Fae, that really scared them. They're used to the concept that things change over thousands and tens of thousands of years. And here's a few centuries, and they're looking more human. So it was creepy. It was uncanny valley. It was threatening. And they attempted to wipe them out, where, of course, the last of the rock that they knew about eventually withdrew to the Rocklands, and they set up a kind of magical barrier that humans couldn't get through. And that's how they survived. And we haven't seen them since then for centuries. To me, that's one of the interesting stories also, is that whole period of change. And of course, from the rock point of view, where they are setting up that barrier, where you have to decide if they did it consciously or not. It could have been a natural defense. Anyway.
No, I love that. I love that because I feel like sometimes when we are dropped into the sandbox that is fantasy, there's so many different options and there's so many things. And it feels like, I think at the beginning, like it's easy because we can just do whatever we want in the genre, right? But I think it shows what you're talking about, just shows the importance of asking yourself as you're designing the world and looking at how the characters are traveling through it. What consequences does this actually have? How would the world actually respond? And you do have to know the rules and limitations of the world that you're building, because otherwise it's either going to feel shallow or it's not going to make sense.
I think with writing anything, but especially with fantasy, the trick is that you have to know an unbelievable amount of material that you will never share. You have to know the history, even if you never say anything about it. You have to know where these people came from. You have to know what kind of society they grew up in, even if that's not going to be figured in the book. And I think, to slightly change the subject, segue a little bit sideways, I think one of the problems a lot of new writers have is they want to show all that off so badly. And this is where we get into the problem not only of info dumps and unnecessary info dumps. I do have some info dumps, but a couple of them are like character info dumps.
Right.
Where one says, "Explain this to me," and great, know. But they're not like, "Hey, look at my world." And I think new writers very much want to do that. They've created this incredibly complex world. They're really proud of it, and they want the reader to know about it. So we not only get into info dumps and long passages that don't matter to the current story, but the dreaded prologue syndrome. Which is where you get agents and editors saying if they even see a prologue, they're not going to read it, which really sucks for me because I write really good prologues. But
amazing prologue.
Thank you very much. But it sets the stage for the book. What they're talking about is the new writer habit of taking a prologue to explain the background, making it very explainerly instead of having action, and then starting the story. And a lot of it's not only is it a slow start and a real slog. We don't want to read a history book, but also a lot of that's not necessary to know.
Right.
A lot of it you want the reader to discover. In my Magister trilogy, the prologue is a scene of basically a girl witnessing, I think her mother, who was a witch who was using the magical system, which in that world requires the sacrifice of life.
Mm.
You get to see someone making the decision of when to use the power, when not to use the power. There's a big moral issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're coming into the book with that awareness. You understand that facet of the power. And then you're dumped into a story with characters who are dealing with it in a completely different way.
Right.
So, and in Coldfire, of course, it opens with the Gerald Tarrant flashback where you see the moment at which he commits himself to the persona that he is in the books. And later, when you connect it and you realize who he is in the story, you connect back to that and you go kind of, holy shit. And that's for, the first time you read it, at whatever point you realize it, whether it's word 1 or chapter 15, you go, holy shit, now I get it. And now I know what they're dealing with, even though none of the characters do.
Yeah.
I mean, they're dealing with a man who did this evil thing.
Right.
And it cannot have left him without marks.
Right.
He's not just a normal guy who did a bad thing. He's not just a prince who wants a lot of power and he's in a bad mood and is willing to hurt people. This is way beyond that. So that's what the prologue sets. But the biggest problem with new writers is that they don't use the prologue effectively. Mm-hmm. They're better off not using it because it is such a turnoff to agents and editors. They see it as a warning sign. Right. I know I can do it because I've done it and they know me. I would have serious thoughts about whether I wanted to do it if I were selling my first book. I still might, but I would really put a stress on making it clear immediately that I am not putting it there to just feed you history, to let the reader know if he just does a few pages that this has a point. There's a reason for this. And then, of course, there are framing prologues, epilogues, which I hate with a passion. Somebody after the end of the story is telling the story. Yeah. So you get the entire story knowing that person will survive it. Which in a fantasy adventure where main characters, think of Game of Thrones. If one of the characters had been narrating that and you knew through all the books that character was not going to die, you have to substitute watching how they don't die, but that isn't quite the same level of intensity. So
different stakes.
I hate framing stories. I really, really do, because and I understand that part of the supposed appeal is that you're seeing how it develops to what you saw, but I'd rather not know what's coming myself.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think framed narratives have to be done very specifically, usually, for me to really love them. But I typically am not a big fan as a reader either. I think the prologue commentary, I think, is really interesting because your prologue in Black Sun Rising is one of the prologues that now my standard of, like, when people come to me and say, oh, I can't stand prologues, I'll be like, try this one and tell me that again. Because I think what it does so brilliantly is that you draw out an immediate emotional response from the author, which invites us to be immersed in the story from the first few pages. And then that reveal really keeps the reader feeling like they are part of the story. They know something that's important now, and that we're trying to get to the point where we figure out why it matters. And I think so many stories, kind of the way I've described it is that they almost ask the reader to look at the story through a glass window instead of actually stepping into the world itself.
And in this case, they, at that point, the reader knows things the characters don't.
Right. Because
the reader, once you make the connection of who this is, you know what his history is, you know where he came from, you know what he's capable of doing, you know that this evil character was something else at one point, which is, of course, the great turning point of his life. I mean, that switch from goodness to evil, if you don't mind my using the cliched terms, but that switch and the fact that there's a reason for it and that it was done consciously. I think Damien says to him at one point, you could seek forgiveness. You could still do atonement. This has been really terrible. Right. You've been murdering people for 1,200 years and doing like the most awful things imaginable, but God is forgiving in theory, and you could be forgiven. And he says, to seek forgiveness, I would have to be sorry for what I did. I said, and I can't, because I made a choice to do that, and I got the payoff, and I do not regret that I made that bargain. He said, I can't show up to God and say I'm sorry if I would do it the same way again.
Right. Yeah. The conversations between Damien and Tarrant in the series were some of my favorite character dialogue I've read ever in fantasy. Like the two of them as a character dynamic, I think is just fascinating because, you know, forced proximity is something that you read in a lot of stories in different, you know, different ways and aspects, but theirs, I think, is such a unique and intriguing way to use that trope. And it really asks us as readers to come to the table and have a conversation with the themes without telling us how to feel about them, which I loved. I love being at the table with the characters so much.
I love trusting the reader. And, you know, if they don't get something exactly the way I thought they would, I don't really care. You know, if they're getting enough to follow the plot and they're getting the important things, I'm good. But I don't mind if they come up with ideas that weren't mine. Of course, the dynamic, first of all, that is my favorite pair of characters I've written in anything I've ever written in my life. If I had to point to my masterpiece, it would be that relationship. You know, it's just right. And
I can see why.
One of the things that drives it is, on the surface, you have a very D&D fantasy trope of good character has to travel with evil character to fight something more evil. Yeah. The complication is that the evil character actually was the prophet of the church that the character belongs to. So this was the most blessed, revered figure in his church, and it still has all that knowledge. He didn't lose it.
Right.
And he hasn't changed personality. He changed what he chose to make of himself, but he didn't suddenly become a brainless zombie, you know, ravening through the halls to kill people. He even says at one point, you know, when I started out in my very first form, I was a vampire, and that was a miserable half-life. That was just like physical hunger and kind of crude and not my cup of tea, you know. And he had to get back his personality and get back his humanity, not in a humane sense, but in a mental structural sense. And of course, in Nightborn, in that book is the novella Dominion, which is yet also, and that is when Tarrant first arrives at the forest, and that is his transformation from original vampire to what he becomes. And it shows you why and how that happens.
Yeah.
And also sheds interesting light. I mean, the most important thing in that story is that for the first time you understand why self-control and honor are so important, that it is what is keeping him from being sucked into the blackness. And suddenly, all the times in the trilogy where you see him intense on keeping his word on something, and you're going, well, that's a really great character trait. Is she convincing me that this kind of character would? And in Dominion, you find out it's not a moral choice. It's not that he has a code of honor he feels so strongly about he has to keep it. It's that he has to have a code. And if he doesn't, the powers he's playing with will suck him down into the darkness, and he will be gone. His humanity will be gone forever.
Right.
And at that point, I think you get a whole new viewpoint on what's going on with him in the trilogy. All the promises he makes, all the words he has to keep, they all fall into that category, and you understand he's fighting to stay alive. He's playing with powers that will destroy him the minute he steps out of line and doesn't control them properly. And that's how he controls them, by having control in general.
Yeah. I can't wait to, and actually you answered a question that I was going to ask you at some point too, because I bought the Nightborn novella and was looking everywhere for Dominion, because for some reason I didn't realize that it was included in the actual book of Nightborn. So that makes me really happy, because I was going to ask you where to find that.
It got rewritten a little bit for the better. It was more vignette-y and it became more short story and
love it.
More short story like. Yeah, this is the master of the words here, story-y.
I totally get it.
I told it in a more storily manner. Anyway, the that is a turning point. That's what I'm talking about, of telling the stories of the turning points. And to me, one of the most interesting hints in the trilogy of something we would like to know about is when he said I was a vampire. He said I hated it, didn't suit me. It's over. Something different now. And you go, well, how to get from A to B?
Right.
You know, and then Nightborn is how the whole planet get from A to B, because the people who settled it, you know, it's a fantasy adventure in structure, in theme, in narrative, but there are science fiction roots. These are our descendants, and that's an important part of the story, that we should recognize ourselves in them and say, okay, if my great-great-grandchildren went to an alien planet and this happened, I believe this is how they would respond. And of course, the big question is, they were scientists. They were all science-oriented. They were specifically chosen not to be religious fanatics, so they didn't have that whole thing going on. Pretty much diversity of genetics, but fairly uniform culture, so there wasn't a lot of conflict in there. What happens when you have a group of people who believe in science, who don't believe in magic, and aren't going to jump to the fact that the idea that there's magic on this world, but are going to say there's something we don't understand here. It looks like magic, and it's really irritating us that it looks like magic because we can't figure it out. But they're trying to put together the clues in a very science fiction way, because the core of science fiction is, if we can understand it, we can control it. You know, so at one point, the entomologist reveals the fact that he has discovered, as he says, there are no creepy crawlies. All the little insecty things are gone from where the humans are. Every single little creepy thing, insects, arachnid stand-ins, wormy things, everything alive that is small, that humans wouldn't normally pay any attention to, will not come near the humans. And as it turns out, it's a very, very big clue. Now, of course, the Nightborn story is told in a shorter form in When True Night Falls in the very beginning, because at that point, you're far enough into the series that I thought you'd like the insight into why the Fae is doing what it is, which is what they're saying, because when they showed up, it wasn't. But you have the impression where humans impress on the Fae a certain pattern, and then they have to deal with the consequences. But Nightborn is the story of the people who originally landed, the discovery of the Fae when they didn't know what it was, because remember, in that generation, no one could see it.
That's right. Yep.
They know all these things are happening, and they have no idea why. They don't even know it's doing it. Forget about why. They may never understand why, but they don't know that there is a power present that has a physical reality to it, and that's connected to this. And then for the first one who gets to work his sight, how do you alter your sight to see the Fae when you don't know what the Fae looks like and you don't know what you're trying to do? It has to actually be kind of unconscious. So this is the story of that very first generation and what they ran into, and why their adaptations were what they were, and why they wound up with the sorcery language. Why do you have a bunch of scientists and they wind up calling people sorcerers and calling things talismans and amulets? Why didn't they come up with Latinate scientific names for everything?
Right.
So you get to see all of those details. It's a good story in its own right, I think, but certainly for fans of the trilogy, it's filling a lot. It's showing you where all the stuff came from that you enjoyed in the trilogy.
Right. You're pulling that curtain back a little bit to show how, again, not just with Tarrant, but like, how did we get from point A to point B? Yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited to, and I think too, like, you know, you've kind of mentioned in talking about it, you have the science fiction, you have the epic fantasy structure, and then there's this undertone of this horror atmosphere holding everything up. And I think at the beginning of the trilogy, you kind of set a tiny bit of that expectation with the prologue, but as we go through the series as a whole, I feel like it just gets more and more balanced between those three genres the farther into the trilogy we get. And I won't say the specific scene for spoilers, but I know you'll know what I'm talking about. In book 3, one of the most, I think, horrific scenes I've ever read in fantasy with Tarrant. And I will be thinking, yes, that one.
I'm very, 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 very proud of that. You think, okay, he's been, this is a spoiler, sort of, but not really. But you have to understand, since this world can create anything that you believe in,
Right.
He is aware that at this point there is a hell. There's a kind of Judeo-Christian church which is central to all of this. So the hell kind of looks like what they think it looks like. And whether it existed there or not originally doesn't matter anymore. You have 1,200 years of people believing in it. He has helped create the hell. And it's there, and it's waiting for him, and it's where he's going because, as I said before, there's no atonement possible at this point. He knows it. And yeah, I had to sit there and go, well, what is hell to him? You know, what is that horrible? And I succeeded. So you guys should read the trilogy to get to it in the third book.
I've been telling everybody. I've had so many people that have been jumping on the trilogy in the last couple of months, which makes me really excited. My husband just started it. He's about 2/3 of the way through book 1 right now.
Awesome.
And he keeps telling me this book is just so good. Like he's just loving it, which is awesome. And what I think is cool too is not only is the story so immersive as an individual reader, it also lends itself so well to discussions between readers. So there's so many layers to the story that, you know, once we've read it, we can sit down and we can really like just dig into all of the layers and all the things that I might notice that my husband didn't, or vice versa. And you can just keep, I can even only imagine that on a reread, it's even more like there's so much there. And I love that you traced.
And a lot of that comes from the fact that you've got 1,200 years of references.
Right.
And they may just pass and you may not even know what they are. You may not even notice them. They don't matter all in book 1. But I knew the whole history, and I knew that what they were at that moment was the result of everything that had been going on for 1,200 years. Even racially, I mean, there are only 3 characters in the series who have any racial appearance that we would recognize. Taran is very obviously white. Sensei is mentioned as being extremely pale, mostly because he kind of falls into the stereotype of being the bookish sort that always stays indoors. So whatever color he had, he didn't have. And then in book 2, we have a very dark-skinned black character. There's no one else with any particular racial characteristics. And the reason is they didn't care. I mean, the original colony were mixed race. And as I've put it, once they discovered the Fae, they really had bigger things to worry about than race. I mean, they weren't racial-oriented people to start with, but that wasn't even on the calendar at that point. You know, you absolutely do not care what the color of someone's skin is. If the two of you have to fight a giant monster together, it just doesn't matter. And if someone is good at fighting giant monsters, then they're a person you want to be around. And the entire paradigm shifts into one where race just isn't even a consideration. So you have a mixed race. You have almost everybody in that world displaying mixed race characteristics. You know, somewhere in the light to medium, darkish kind of skin tone, and little bits. There are little hints of what we would say looked Asian, and others that don't. But Taran is an actual white person, and there haven't been a lot of those in a long time because they have to not mix with anyone else for 1,200 years to stay that way. So it's one of the first hints you get that something's a little off with him.
That he's, different. Yeah. So when you talk about 1,200 years of history as a writer, and, you know, even with these short stories and these vignettes, there's still, like you said before, so much that the author knows that the readers won't ever see. How do you even begin to organize 1,200 years of history so you can utilize it when you're writing?
Oh, wow. You know, I'm tempted to give 2 answers. The honest one is I kind of do when I write the book and then go, oh, shit, that wasn't very consistent, was it? And then on the first rewrite, I fix everything. You know, but sometimes you have to write, sometimes I have to write to know what it is I want to do. Okay. And sometimes you screw it up. I discovered when I was writing Nightborn, I had made some errors I have to retcon. Now it's something I absolutely don't believe in, and I didn't want to do, but my editor says that we should consider the version of volume 2 was the story that people told, which didn't necessarily match what actually happened, which works for this book because that's one of the big things.
Totally.
But I made a couple of mistakes in not thinking out things the colony would have actually had to do when they showed up. And like, especially the numbers and where people were and where the DNA was getting held and everything. And there were some things I had to just go, all right, you know, fans will either appreciate it or they yell at me both at publicity, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love that too, because I typically approach it very similarly, where I feel like I have to get in the world and start working in it, and then I start, like you said, pulling in, okay, I need that, and on a rewrite, oh yep, I missed here, I need to go back, and I just think, you know, that's one of the things that I always give as an encouragement to very new writers who haven't published yet is they I think sometimes wait too long to get into their world. They're so busy writing all of the little details that it's like, well, you have to get in there.
And you don't have to write it all in order, because the thing is, your first draft is just a first draft. And I mean, there's a talk I give sometimes at writing cons and everything where I say, your first draft sucks. Everybody's first draft sucks. There's not an exception to that. If I look at George R.R. Martin, Hemingway, Dickens, or anyone else, and I look at their first manuscript, there are notes all over it changing things, which you can't see anymore with digital work, but in the early manuscripts, they literally were written. Right. I don't know if the younger generation realizes that cut and paste actually meant cut and paste. Literally, you took a scissor and you would cut out a paragraph and then go tape it to the place you wanted the paragraph to be. So it was literal. So that's not on the list of things that don't have a reason for us saying it that way.
I mean, I still print out my manuscript once I'm done writing it. I will print it out, and I'm very old fashioned like that, because I need to be able to see it and actually like physically.
Oh, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I've gotten more accustomed to working on a screen, but I definitely don't catch errors on a screen as much. You know, that a lot really is clear to me when I'm reading. And anytime I read somebody else's work, I try to get it in print if I can. I've never been big on e-reading. It has its purpose. And as you get old, it has a very big purpose, because you can adjust the font. So e-readers make literature available at an older age when it would be comfortable. But I prefer paper. I mean, I just, the feel of a book, the look of a book, and writing. I prefer writing. But you have to adapt. My first book was so long. I think it was like 700-page manuscript. Oof. And I knew I could not write it without a word processor. Now, this was like practically the first year of word processors. Now, I'd been doing temp work, or I'd been demonstrating them in businesses for like 10 years. Sure. But you didn't have them at home. And that you had, at that point, the Radio Shack one, which would record it on a cassette tape. But there's no index. There's no way to jump to where you want to be. You just had to, like, if you wanted to go to the second section, you just had to listen to it while it was fast. Or beep, beep, and you go, oh, there's the break. That was it. That's what happened. You couldn't add something. You could tape over something, but it wasn't going to make room for anything new. So it was very limited, but I knew that I personally could not handle producing a 700-page manuscript. Yeah. You know, so I don't know how they did it before that, but I asked my editor once, here's an anecdote for you. When I first started publishing, big books were kind of rare. And they said they were taking a really big risk because it was a thick book. I think it was about 500 in print, about that thick. And not a big deal now. And I'm overshadowed by Jordan, you know. And after that, they became the thing. I mean, I did a trilogy with really thick books. Tad Williams did a volume with enormous books. We kind of grew up together in the same generation at Daw. George R.R. Martin introduced his Crown of Game of Thrones. A lot of major books, and it seemed like after a while, every single fantasy book was enormous. Even some authors that I really liked who used to write short stuff started writing longer stuff. So Robert Silverberg being my best example. And I would go through longer books going, okay, if I trimmed out half of this would be a much better book. You know, it's longer than it needs to be. And I said to her once, I said, why did that happen? Why did the field shift? What shifted about our reading habits that made these suddenly sell well where they hadn't sold well before? And she just looked at me and said, word processors. Anne Rice, Interview with the Vampire, same thing. She said, word processors. When it became viable for an author to write a 2,000-page manuscript, more of them started doing it.
Yeah.
In the old days, in Hemingway's days, that whole manuscript had to be handwritten or typed. If you wanted a second copy, that's before photocopies. So if Hemingway wanted a second copy of his book, he had to do carbon paper while he was typing and got one copy out of it, maybe two at most. Or he had to retype the whole thing. And when I revised my first novel, I eventually did have to retype the whole thing because I made so many changes. But the point is, I couldn't just write things in the margin. I had to retype the whole damn thing. So the physical effort of turning out a monumentally big book comes into our world in the 80s, really.
Yeah.
We see a whole shift in the market at that point. Of course, now we're dealing with the opposite. Now we're dealing with the online generation, where I saw an interesting study once of reading patterns and how people actually read. They basically tracked people's eyeballs while they were reading online. And they found that the reading followed. Okay, I'm going to try to do this. Let me see. Yeah, I think that's the right direction. I'm trying to figure out if we're reversed or not. And what the eyes did was, in a paragraph online, they'd read a line, another line, kind of a line, then a little bit of a line, then a little bit of a line. The next paragraph, they'd read a whole line, and then a little bit of a line, and a little bit of a line. The point is, they got the basic subject, they figured out what the thing was about, and then they picked up some information, but they weren't really paying that much attention. That we can. And you're seeing more and more articles where there's only one or two sentences between spaces. And that's catering to that. The novella, I don't want to say it was a dead form because there were novellas, but magazines usually didn't take them because they were taking up so much space, that could go to other stories. Publisher didn't publish them because financially it was a loser to have a book that small. Self-publishing has allowed us to bring them back. And of course, in the Nightborn, we packaged one into the book. So there weren't even very short books. And I remember thinking at one point in my life, I missed so much the books where you could pick it up and get so wrapped into it that you stayed up all night, you didn't do your homework, you knew you were going to be tired at work the next day, whatever the price to pay was, but you could not put it down. And in 10 hours, you could read the book if that's all you did for 10 hours.
Yeah.
I miss that. I miss that concentration. With the really big fantasy epics, I miss the fact that you can't stay immersed long enough to get the payoff. So I like that we're going back to shorter books. And I think it's better for the form. I think an awful lot of writers were padding. Now, some like Martin and Jordan and Williams, and hopefully me, we had enough to say that hopefully it was actually filling a large book. But for an awful lot of authors, they didn't. And they wanted the book to be long and complicated. They specifically looked at Robert Jordan, whose Wheel of Time, was the big leader. And again, that's my generation. We all were introduced at the same time in the same year. And they look at that book and they think, well, I want something this detailed and this big. And then, of course, when Game of Thrones got big again, I want something with this much detail in it. But Game of Thrones, not necessarily the kind of book I enjoy reading that much because, again, I don't like the really long epics where I'm not good at names. I like enough characters that are really clear that I can keep track of them easily. But things always happen. There's no point in a book where something is not happening. There's no chapter where it's wasted pagination just to tell us about a character or tell us about the world. In every single scene, something is going on that matters to the plot. The plot is always moving forward. And that is what a lot of, especially new writers, did not do. They wanted the longer thing, the longer story, so they thought they had to add wordage. You hit the same with Stephen King. By the way, I prefer his shorter books for exactly that reason. I think he does get into more detail than I want for some of the long ones. But again, you have people writing horror books who don't understand that they need to pare their story down to what is necessary. And that if they just put in a lot of description to make it a bigger, more detailed book, they may just be boring the reader, and the reader will make it really restless. It's like, when's the next thing going to happen? So I'm glad we seem to be coming out of that because people no longer feel it's necessary to publish for them to do that. I judged the Philip K. Dick Award year before last, I think.
Okay.
So I got to see every single book that was being printed for the first time in paperback. Every single one got shipped, way more than I thought. I got to say that. But a very and some of the self-published stuff was god awful. But there were a lot of novellas. There were a lot of small books,
Yeah.
and self-publishing. Yeah. And of course, you have small presses now are using the publish on demand. So even if they're functioning as a press, they don't have to make the investment in printing the book. They don't have to worry about it being on a bookshelf in a store.
Right.
So they can make a book basically any length the book needs to be.
Right.
And we're seeing a lot more novellas. Some of them, a couple of them I had on my list of I think these are the best of the year. So they were outdoing the really long ones.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that we're seeing shorter stuff. I really am, but not quite as happy that we're trying to cater to a readership that has lost its attention span.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. It's interesting too, because I think, we talked a little bit at the beginning about one thing that you like to do in your writing is trusting your readers.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's kind of a vicious cycle going on to some extent right now where authors are not trusting the readers.
Right.
And so they're giving too much information, and also readers aren't asking to be trusted. They're not, they're not saying,
I'm going to them. They want it given to them. Now that's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, I don't want to hand my readers everything. On the other hand, especially in today's world where they're not reading very carefully, they're going to miss shit. I mean, when I was dealing with theater and talking about people with TV scripts and things, there was a saying that anything you wanted the reader or the audience to know that they had to know, you just state 3 times. You didn't have to reveal it the same way each time, but you had to make sure that information got out there 3 times, because if you put it out there once, half your audience wouldn't even be aware it happened. They would just not pay attention to it. 2, you'd pick up some more, but you really had to do it 3 times to be really totally sure. Now, at the end of Coldfire, unimportant spoiler, that is to say, it won't ruin your appreciation of the book, but it is a spoiler. At the end of Coldfire, you have a character, partly supernatural in nature, who at one point looks at a portrait of another character and says, "Here's to you, Dad," and he drinks. I do not know how much clearer I could possibly make the fact that character is his father. You can't get it. I can't come up with any line other than for him to say, "Hey, thank you, Father."
Right.
I have seen so many discussions online of who is this person. Some of them think that the character that who I'm talking about, the character that is father, some of them think that he is that character. And I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. And then many of them wonder, and they have no idea, and like, where is the clue? How are we going to figure this out? And I feel like beating my head against a wall. I can't get more obvious. It's just not physically possible. And that's where we get the triple repetition thing from, that no matter how clear and obvious you are, some of your readers are just not going to get it. And you have to write a story where they'll enjoy it even if they don't get that point. They may not enjoy it as much, but they're still going to be able to follow the story.
Well, and I think too, for some readers, it may also be a denial of letting go, if that makes sense.
Well, that definitely played into that particular episode, because a character that the readers very much wanted to read about died. And you can taste how much the readers want him not to have died. And there are fanfic out the wazoo about him not dying.
I'm sure.
And it is possible he didn't die, given the way the book is written. You might not be able to figure out how, because all the rules are saying he had to die. But the way the book is structured, you kind of have faith that this is somebody that, if it was possible to beat the system, he would be beating the system. And I mean, because that is what the whole series is about, that whatever the world was throwing at him magically, he managed to get in control of it. And deep inside, even your belief that he might not be dead, that's not like me compromising the story. That's them understanding that the character would just look at this as yet another challenge to overcome. So I was kind of surprised they missed the dad reference, but I wasn't surprised that's how they saw the connection. But yeah, they want the character to keep going.
Yeah.
You know, they want more adventures of. And I think a lot of that is wishful thinking at the end. They want to believe that that character is still around. He's in town. He's got a little shop, and there will be a sequel. Well, he will do exciting and wonderful things.
Yeah. Which, I mean, again, is a compliment to you as the author for creating a character that, you know, people want so badly to stay in company with. Because, yeah, I felt like that at the end in terms of just that final page. And this is something that I think, like we were talking about with the way reading has changed and the way people connect with stories changing. I think too many readers miss the feeling of sitting and closing that final page and the number of different emotions that go through you and that you have to sit with for days sometimes afterwards. Like I always call it a book hangover, you know. And
yes, absolutely.
I shut Crown of Shadows and I had a book hangover for like 3 days because I didn't know how to feel about it.
Thank you so much.
It was so, and I think I'm really on a mission as a YouTuber at this point to encourage people back to that, to encourage people to find, and like reading just for entertainment is completely fine. But I think when people are like, man, I want to get more out of my reading, it's like, this is the kind of stuff that makes reading so magical, is that feeling you get when you close that final page and it sits with you. And like sometimes you have to trust the author. You know, it goes two ways. You have to trust the author to get you there, to bring you to that place. So,
and I also want the reader to imagine what happened next. I mean, I like books with endings. I think you need to have a firm resolution of whatever the issue was in that book or series. But I want it to end. And my goal is, someone says, what's your highest goal in writing? And I said, when they close the book, I want their brain to be buzzing about the book. I want them not to be able to sleep that night because they're thinking about what happened after the end of the book. Yeah. And there's a TV show, Black Mirror, which is one of the best TV shows ever done, very Twilight Zone-y. But the one thing I hate them for is every single episode is 15 minutes too long, because every single one across the board, because they'll tell a story. Over the course of the story, you'll discover what's going on. In many cases, it is a discovery of a mystery. You find out what's going on. Usually it's a pretty dark, horrific thing, you know, that's there. Right. You have the resolution of the people who were trying to discover it and where they are. And then you are left to just spend the next week thinking, oh my God, how is that going to affect them? And coming up with stories in your brain. Except no, because the last 15 minutes, they tell you what happened to the people and they just lay it out. And there's the ending and there's a scene you didn't need to see. And often it's extra and it's just not very important. But there is an ending point in almost every single episode when I would have ended the episode. Right. I know a lot of readers don't like that. They want to be handed the ending. And I want to think. I want their neurons to be buzzing when they put down my book.
Yeah. Well, I love what you commented on earlier about seeing the reader's discovery arc as its own part of the story. And I think it's so important as an author to see the at least I do, like the reader as their own character in the story, and how are they experiencing what the other characters are going through and kind of seeing them as part of the party. I felt like I was part of the group that is traveling through Erna, you know, and that's,
I love you so much.
I do. But I think that is such a unique ability that books have to really portal us into other worlds. And I think authors don't take advantage of that as much as they should, or don't know how to. And so it's really a treat to get to, especially when, you know, somebody who loves fantasy and has been reading it for a long time, you read so much of it that sometimes it can feel like you're always chasing that kind of actual portal immersion into a world after a while. And it's really encouraging and powerful when you are able to find that. So thank you for that experience, because that was amazing.
Thank you for the review. I'm so glad people are rediscovering these books, because, you know, they made such a hit when they came out. They've been on a number of best fantasy ever lists. And I'm glad they're getting rediscovered. I really am. One of the hardest things to do deals with that, which is if you have the reader discovering things along with the characters. First of all, there are two rules. One is I despise stupidity. I will never in my entire life have a character plot driven by stupidity. No one is ever going to do something stupid to make the plot happen. Now, you might have to do something stupid for plot reasons. I mean, you have a character who's prone to drinking in book 3. It is conceivable that while drinking, he would make a mistake and do something stupid, but that's story. You're never going to have to miss an obvious clue. Okay.
Right.
Everybody in my stories is intelligent, unless there's some bestial magical reason for them not to be. And that is damn hard because you not only have to, I mean, you have to lay the clues, but you can't have the character pick up on them, but you have to have a reason he doesn't pick up on them. You know, it's like, and also you know that at some point the reader's going to catch on. So in that voyage of discovery, you do not know when the reader's going to figure it out. With science fiction fantasy fandom, you can bet some of them are going to pick it up on the first page because they'll see the pattern. Hopefully you have a little longer. Some will be stumped for a while. Some will come up with an explanation that is a red herring that isn't what you intended. But they're all going to have a different point at which they realize what's going on, one of which is the identity of the person they're traveling with in book 1.
Right.
And, you know, there comes a point at which you make the connection. You go, holy shit, I know who this character is, you know, and now I understand everything that's been going on for 100 pages. Or maybe you picked it up after 10 pages.
Right.
You know, there's one of the many shows like trying to spin off from Lord of the Rings. I think it's, I don't remember, this one with Galadriel swims through the ocean or something.
Oh, Rings of Power.
Yeah, thank you. There's one really beat up character who turns up on a raft. And I mean, I had people saying to me after that episode, I'm like, that was so obviously Sauron. I mean, there was no question about it. It was Sauron, not because he did or said anything Sauron-y, but they recognized the place he was being fit into in the tropic storytelling of a fantasy. So they knew he had to be, that's what it needed to be. And there were other characters in that too, where their identity was supposed to be a mystery, but it was patently obvious to the reader because the people in the story hadn't read Lord of the Rings, but everybody watching it did. So you have to balance. I'm trying to give you surprises and lead you through that voyage of discovery with the fact that I know you read the damn material.
Right.
Okay. I know you know the whole background. You probably read the Silmarillion. You probably know more about the mythology of this world than the writers of the show did. You know, you're not going to miss any reference. They may think it's mysterious. It is not mysterious. So everything you write has to be able to engage the reader on some level, independent of when they make that revelation. So the story of Damien traveling with someone, it's got to be a good story if that someone's identity is a total mystery. It's got to be a good story if you know from day one who it is. There has to be enough new information being added, but veiled in a way that it's not giving everything away. And in many senses, you're writing for a number of audiences at exactly the same time.
Right.
And if I had to point to what I think is one of the biggest challenges, that's it. You know, if you see something coming, the writer has to assume that somebody will see it coming. And the story has to be rewarding and have a payoff, even if they saw it coming. You can't hope they don't. And some people will see it coming and just won't enjoy the book as much. That's not the goal. You have to have different levels. You have to have different timetables of payoff of the book based on what the reader has figured out. And for me, that is by far the hardest thing. Now, mostly, especially with murders and horrors and things, mysteries and horrors, mostly get around it with red herrings. That is, you put things in the plot that will get people looking elsewhere. But that is so common. It's a trope in of itself. So you are waiting for the red herrings. You know you're going to get red herrings. God, I'm forgetting what it is. What show or something where every single time it wasn't the right, and you could pick out who was going to be the bad guy, the antagonist. You just knew it in your gut. You knew it from the way he was interacting with the fake antagonist. You know, there was something that, and of course, okay, this is a spoiler for life, so I'm about to show you something which will ruin movies for you forever. Okay, brace yourselves.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay. One of my most hated tropes in all of fiction, which shows up a lot in movies and TV, is that somebody makes a big speech about how wonderful their future is going to be, and then they die. Or they make a speech about everything they're going to reveal to the main character, and then they die. The problem with that is that eventually you recognize it, and you recognize that the speech means something bad is about to happen. In Yellowstone, when the two characters that are going to get married, whose names I can't remember names, and it was a while ago, but they're finally getting together and finally connected and finally talking about getting married and sitting on the stairs of the house which they're both staying in, realizing that they can build a life together, whereas neither one of them thought they would be able to do that with anyone. I mean, she certainly didn't. And you listen to that, and it goes on for a certain amount of time, and you go, okay, shit's going to hit the fan tomorrow, which it does. Now, whether character in it dies, the point is that moment is blown, they are attacked, terrible things happen. But you know, in the middle of that conversation, just because the writer is investing so much time in that conversation, okay? There's one in Fauda, which is the series about a special ops Israeli team that does a lot of, you know, secretive things in the Arab territories. An interesting mix of not quite getting the Israeli operations right, but getting a lot of the cultural surrounds right. It's evidently popular on both sides of the fence over there. And there's one scene where he's trying to get a Palestinian doctor out of the Palestinian territories to safety because she helped them. And at one point, while they're almost at the border, he does what I consider to be the stupidest thing on the face of the earth, and they stop for a sandwich, basically. And I'm like, no, somebody's life depends on getting out of the territories. The border's within an hour. Suck it up and be hungry. You know what I mean? You don't go to the bathroom at that point. You just keep going. Anyway, they stop. And at that point, they have a conversation about what life is going to be for her after she gets out. And at that moment, you know, she's not getting out, which she doesn't. You know, the shit hits the fan 5 minutes later. So that is my...
Oh, I hate that.
I hate it so much, and it's just a signal, and you know it. I don't think it's as common in books because it's not as obvious in books. But when you're watching something where the plot is moving along, and suddenly there's a long conversation. I mean, it's part of how it's framed in the story that it matters. It's a significant conversation. That drives me crazy. And I'll give you my other big spoiler. There is a place in the human body, right? I think it's on the left side. Yeah, on the left side, where you could theoretically send a blade through the entire body and not hit a major organ. There's a movie called Mr. Roberts where they actually explain that, and a guy who is trying to fake that he was stabbed picks that spot because he says that's a spot. I'm not going to hit intestines, not going to hit a major organ. That is the spot where you stand the best chance of surviving if something goes through your body. And unfortunately, once you know that, I'm so sorry I'm ruining this for everybody.
No.
Once you know that, you know that anybody who got seriously wounded in that particular spot is not going to die.
It's fine.
And I was thinking of that with Law and Order. I was watching a Law and Order episode. One of the main characters gets shot in the front, and he looks like he's covered in blood and everything. And then you realize the wound is right here. And at that point, okay, not dying. You know? Because that's where they have to put it. They don't have many places to put it. If sometimes they put it in the shoulder, but if they're being accurate, that would shatter the shoulder and be really, really awful. There really is, you know, it could go through their butt, which is undignified. But there are very few places where a bullet could go through you and look very serious and not take you down. You know. So those are my two big spoilers. That spot on the body, man, you will see it so often now that I have alerted you to it. I'm so sorry.
No, you're complete. So I'm a huge military fantasy, military nonfiction, historical fiction, all of that reader. So
and they'll get the spot right.
there's so many. One of the things that drives me bonkers in fantasy film, books, everything, is you'll see a warrior character in combat. You know, he's fighting, he's got a super gory sword, and then when the battle is done, he will take that super gory sword and put it back in the sheath.
Oh, don't say that.
I know. Same. Every time I
was a fencer. I dealt with rapiers. I cringe every single time. Oh my God.
Every time. And it's in the big, like, Game of Thrones has that all the time. I see people do it in books all the time. And I'm just like, well, you're never getting that back out.
just wipe it. Or if you do, it'll rust. Or if you do, you've ruined the sheath. Regardless, it's going to start smelling like rot. You can't clean out the inside of a sheath.
Right.
And yeah, it's like wipe it on your clothing. It'll be messy. It'll be awful. People will see a blood stain, but that's not the equivalent of losing the sword. You know? Yeah.
Yep. Drives me absolutely bonkers.
And the other one is, while we're talking about impossibilities, see, you could edit this stuff out if our talk is too long.
No, I'm good.
Falling. You cannot fall without getting hurt. You can't. Now, every now and then we have a character that is so fit that he knows how to land on his feet and roll, and you could possibly buy a couple of stories, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, if you are falling from, if you're falling even from the height of a roof with a house, you could get badly hurt. 2 stories, you are going to get hurt. 3 stories, you're probably going to get killed. I once saw a breakdown of how much damage would be done by falling certain distances, and it was only like 3 stories before you stood a very good chance of dying. And once you got up to 4 or 5, you were not going to survive that. But we watch movies where, like, there's a giant skylight above a 6-story atrium. They fight on the skylight, the grass breaks, they come crashing to the ground, and they're kind of stunned. And then they get up and, go back to fighting. And I guess the broken, shattered glass cushioned their fall or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But it's kind of a trope in movies and TV that, the tough guys can survive a fall. And it's like, if the tough guy breaks his neck, being tough is not going to help you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have a little bit of an issue with how badly people get wounded and they still keep fighting. But I know that there have been people who suffered unbelievable wounds and kept going.
Right.
There's one with a woman who was stabbed multiple times and left for dead. And literally her head had been like partially detached, and she was holding it up when she staggered. I don't remember if that's the one where they cut off her hands too. There've been a couple of them like that. But she made it to the road, literally holding up her head because it wouldn't hold itself up anymore. And she survived. So it would be unrealistic to say that never happens, that you have someone who can't put up with, all of that damage. You have incredible adrenaline. When you have things like the invasion in Israel on October 7th, they were on drugs, and they were specifically on a drug where they don't feel pain and they don't stop. The adrenaline keeps going, they don't feel pain, and no matter how badly you hurt them when you're taking that drug, they're just going to keep going. So there may be circumstances that would cause that to happen. But in general, I think it's pretty much stereotyped that if you beat someone up, even if they later say, yes, you broke a rib, they're not acting like you broke a rib. You know what I mean? They're not having trouble with the muscles that are anchored to bones that broke. They're not, assume the character fighting for his life might not show pain, but broken bones hurt a lot. And it seems like afterward, they don't really hurt until they're lying in the hospital with bandages, and then they like really ache while people come visit them. But it doesn't play into the scene at all.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, there's such a balance where I feel like sometimes people want to see stories where people are doing, extraordinary things beyond capability. But also, I think sometimes we get too caught up in the bigger spectacle and stakes of things, when human beings being fragile is stakes in and of itself, big stakes. And I think that sometimes that's all you need. Like, it doesn't have to be 8 stories through the glass ceiling of an atrium and so yeah, it's interesting to see how like what certain people are willing to suspend disbelief for.
Well, in Crown of Shadows, you have a character who actually broke his leg, breaks his leg near the ankle, and keeps going. And I have read stories of people who did have a leg break or a fracture, and they did keep walking. They were in agonizing pain. They couldn't move as easily as they would have moved before, but they did keep walking. I didn't make that up. I knew it could be done. But it still had to be there. It's a major element. It's not like I'm tough, so I'll ignore it. It's like I'm tough enough to keep walking, but it's going to be hard to see past the pain, you know?
Right.
So, and if you're reading a lot of military fiction, I'm sure you're running into that a lot. And I'm sure the military fiction writers are complaining about this stuff right and left. Because that's usually where I read the complaints of what would kill people that doesn't. That's usually the people who get upset are the military writers and the people with armed experience, you know?
Yeah, which is fair.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we're closing, I wanted to ask if you had, because you've shared so much. I feel like I usually end with something that's like advice or encouragement for new authors. You've been sharing a ton of that.
Kind of throw it in because I knew you wanted it.
Yeah, but also if somebody was going to start reading your work either after having read Coldfire, so I'm in that position now where I've read Coldfire, that is the only piece of work from you that I've read so far, and or someone who's coming into your work for the first time, where do you recommend they start?
Well, for category 2, if you're into fantasy, the Coldfire Trilogy, no question. It's the best thing I've ever written. I would say, I'm not going to say there are no flaws in it that I would fix now with 30 years of hindsight, but it is as close as I have to a masterpiece. That's it. That's my masterwork. If you're into science fiction, I would recommend This Alien Shore, which is my best science fiction structurally as well as writing. I may have done some better writing in a few of the books at parts, but that's the best story. And also predicted a lot of our internet connection, the constant connection. It's a little bit different. It deals with the interface between the human brain and computers. And a lot of stuff that is in that book, I feel very proud because I think it kind of presaged what is actually happening, particularly with that, because since they're hooked up directly, they talk about there being nodes that will connect them to the outer net. And at that point, the internet was a very nebulous thing where you had to know the right search words to get anywhere, and you kind of had to know codes, you know, and there were whole books on how to use the internet. And in this book, they're just, anytime they want to connect to it, it's there. It's in their brain. They have the capacity to get to it. It's comprehensible. It's amusingly similar in some regards in terms of how they set it up and how the advertising works. But the concept that you walk around 24 hours a day, connectable to everything and capable of contacting anyone.
Right.
That was kind of new at that point. I'm very proud of that. I'm sure there were many scientists who saw that coming, but it wasn't in common literature. And also, that one has a autistic main character. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from people with autism that they really, actually there are kind of 2, but that they really appreciate that and appreciate how it's written. And that the autism is a source of the story and of the plot and of his strength. And in order to make that character work, I had to create a society where what we consider to be mental disabilities were normal. In other words, we're not treating them as neurodiverse and learning how to deal with them. We're saying, okay, there is no normal. Everybody's got different mental conditions because, as it happens, that particular society has a lot of things that screwed up in mental development. So a lot of the symptoms of things that we see, autism, ADHD, things like that, they turn up a lot. A lot of people have them. So they had to come up with a society structure that could accommodate all that in a normal way. Not saying you're different, but I'll accommodate you, but just saying, okay, people come in different form, shapes, and sizes mentally. Here's the code we follow that enables us to communicate effectively. And I'm very proud of that creation. And I know that has got a lot of attention from autistic circles, and there have been articles about it in a number of magazines and neurodiverse publications. So between those 2 things, and the vision of the mental computer interface, in addition to what I just think is a damn good story,
Mm.
I mean, those things are really some of my best science fiction-y creations. So I'd recommend
Sure.
this Alien Shore. That one does have a sequel, but not with the same characters. So,
Okay.
you know, well, with one, no, none of the same characters. That's right. They're all new in book 2. So kind of sequel. But again,
Yeah.
I had people asking, at the end of it, where the female character's been through unbelievable, baby spoiler, where we're both being so careful we haven't hit a big one yet. One of the female characters has been through incredible trials and tribulations, and she finally takes refuge in a place where she can fit in and make a future for herself. And I have fans writing me, they want to know what happened after that. And the answer is, I want you to lie awake at night, wondering
think about
what happened to her and thinking about all the different things that might happen to her. And I've had people write to me about what they thought happened, and I'm like, well, that's crazy and kind of misses the point of the book. But what the hell? It's your vision. I'm good.
Yeah.
Brain buzz. If I can give you the book hangover, that's it.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I have a couple on the way now. I'm going to read Nightborn first, and then I have had Madness Season recommended to me by several people also. So I'm looking forward to checking that out. But yeah, I'm so grateful, Celia, for the time that you've been sharing this evening. Thank you so much for coming on and doing the interview. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to hear about your work, and thank you for writing such an awesome trilogy.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the great review. It's really very heartening, when you've had something that's been out there that long, to know that people are kind of rediscovering it and caring about it.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's nothing I would look back on where there is something I wouldn't change. Every book I've ever written has some flaws. I'm not going to say anything's perfect, but that's without question. That's my big life's work. That's the one. The moral and ethical questions that it explores without ever making you think that you're exploring moral and ethical questions. I think really is what science fiction and fantasy do best.
Yeah.
The ideal is to have an exciting story which says something about human nature, and those books are all about human nature. And what does human nature become when you change the parameters that it's functioning in?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that so much, because especially as a young female author of fantasy, and looking forward to what someday hopefully will be whatever my masterwork ends up being, just getting to hear the advice and encouragement and story of, the authors that have laid the path I'm walking on. I appreciate that so much. So thank you so much for your time.
I'll take 1 minute of your time to say that
Sure.
We're going to have a Roblox game coming out in about a year based on the Coldfire Trilogy. And Grim Oaks Publications is producing a collector's edition of Black Sun Rising with illustrations, color illustrations by Jessica Levi, who did the Nightborn cover. Show them the Nightborn cover. See, you had them back with you, didn't you?
Yep, it's right here.
There's the Nightborn cover.
Gorgeous.
Phenomenal artist, just unbelievable artist.
Yeah.
I just fell in love with her art.
Beautiful.
And I'm like,
and I will have links for everybody that's watching. I will have links down in the description box to your website. I will see. I'm not sure if Grim Oak has a launch page or anything for the special edition. They don't have it yet.
They're going to have it.
Okay.
I will put it in the news feed on my webpage, which is csfriedman.com. I do have a Patreon page, but I have to say, due to health reasons, I have not been very active. So I can't promise you if you show up, you'll get a lot of stuff. But that is where the Gerald Terrence story is going to go as it gets finished.
Cool.
So, there will be that. And hopefully some other benefits. And I apologize if I haven't done as much for them as I should be, and I have to catch up on that. But anyway, I do have a Patreon page. And those people have been contributing to the Names of Terrence family and the kind of things my stories will.
Cool.
So they have had input into where my writing is going.
That's so cool.
That was my sales speech. I'm very excited about the Roblox. I personally don't play Roblox, but I do tutor. So I have a lot of younger kids that I teach, and they're all obsessed. They're all totally obsessed with it, and I love what they're doing with it. It's really great. They're going to start by introducing the world and adventures in the world, and they say if that takes off and goes well, they will eventually start developing more material that is more specific to the book story.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think they're doing a really good job. It looks like so far. Fingers crossed.
That's awesome. Yeah. So everybody stay tuned and keep up with Celia's website for info on all of that, because that sounds
It'll all
really
be
cool.
announced. Everything will be linked. This will be linked. My other interview will be linked. Everything I do will be linked.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for watching. Again, check out the links in the description. And Celia, thank you for joining me this evening. And we will see you guys in the next video.